happy you're here. We're going to start in a couple minutes, but now I'm just going to kind of start and let everybody kind of get into the chat and start with us.
Good morning, St. Luke's. We are happy that you are joining us this morning. It seems like every time we come together for worship, things have changed just a little bit. This week, we have seen a shelter-in-place order go into effect. If you're not familiar with it, what that means is to do your best to not go out, to have as few people as possible, to really try to help curb the spread of the coronavirus. So this morning you might notice worship's a little bit different. We're trying to do our part of the shelter in place. Your praise team does a phenomenal job of being here, of showing up. But in the midst of the shelter in place, in the midst of this virus, your praise team has also got several people who work in very high contact jobs, who are around a lot of people. And so to help kind of curb the spread of that, we're going to try to be a little bit more simple. And so this morning, Elijah has agreed to come and play to help us keep our numbers a little bit lower. But if you're still missing your praise team, after worship this morning, Cody and Veronica are going to be leading some worship songs on Facebook Live. So once the worship service is over, don't leave. We still have another time of praise and worship for you. One other thing I would like to encourage you, I am in an empty sanctuary this morning, and Elijah will agree, it's kind of weird. Looking out and there being no one here. Except that we do have some beautiful, bright, shining paper faces staring back at us. Some of you in the congregation took us up on it and have made your representation to put in the pews. And so while we might not have our church family here, it's great to be able to see some of the faces that we're missing. So this week, I encourage you, create your face, right? Make a body, make a picture, make something, and we will place it in the pews where you normally sit so that we can at least worship kind of together until we all come back. Now I invite you to pray with me as we begin worship. God, we are grateful to gather together. If not in this place, God, to gather together around your worship. So we ask that you open up our hearts and our minds so that we might feel you. Let us sing praise to you, God, so that you might hear us. And let us worship together this morning. Amen.
You've been walking the same old road for miles and miles. If you've been hearing the same old voice of the same old life. If you're trying to feel the same old hope inside, there's a better life. There's a better love. If you got pain, he's a pain taker. If you feel lost, got pain, he's a pain taker. If you're lost, he's a way maker. If you need freedom, said that, he's a prison shaking savior. You got chains, he's a chain breaker. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can feel it, somebody testify. If you believe it, if you can feel it, if you receive it, somebody testify, testify. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can feel it, somebody testify. You got pain, he's a pain taker. You feel lost, well, he's a way maker. If you need freedom, set them. He's a prison shaking savior. You got chains, he's a chain breaker. If you need freedom, set them. He's a prison shaking savior. You got chains, he's a chain breaker.
If you have a Bible close, I encourage you to go ahead and get it out. We're going to be looking in Isaiah this morning and also in Mark. But here's a passage from Isaiah 53. It's verses 3 through 5. It says, "He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity, and as one from whom others hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him of no account. Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases, yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed."
Cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, since his feet, the Savior on that cursed tree, his body bound and drenched in tears, laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by a heavy stone, side still in dark room. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For in these days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. And on the third and break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, tremble death, where is your sting? Angels roar for Christ the King. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For in these days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. You shall return and roads of white. The blazing sun shall pierce the night. Thou wilt rise among the saints. My gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise His name forevermore. For in these days we will sing Your praise. Oh, Lord, our God. Oh, Lord, our God. Oh, Lord, our God.
Let us pray. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to You. Amen. Wesley, my middle son, has got severe eczema. Now with that comes a couple of different things. None of them make life tremendously easy, but he's had it since birth. So for the most part, we've pretty well gotten acclimated to kind of the ebb and flows of what having a skin condition can do. So eczema just makes it so your skin dries out and cracks and is prone to being itchy and getting infected. So when he was younger, several years ago, he got a really bad infection. And we had been through it before. He had had infections before. He's had infections since then. But this was one of the worst ones he'd had. And it happened really, really quickly. And what it looked like is just his skin becomes really red and irritated. And it's not just itchy, but it physically hurts. So when it came to times like this, I was always the one that took him to the doctor. It wasn't ever an easy thing, but I always ended up being the one that went. So this particular time, we go to the doctor, and Wesley was young, but there was still this uneasy tension. He was young, but he knew what he was walking into. He knew going into the doctor that it was probably going to hurt worse before it felt better. And so we're sitting in the doctor's office, and I remember looking at the wall and looking at the "Where's Waldo" on it, and I'm trying to make him smile, and I'm trying to make him laugh. But deep down, if I could be anywhere else in the world, I wish I could have been. Because I'm almost 100% sure I know what the doctor's going to come in and say, and I know what's going to have to happen. And so the doctor comes in and he looks at Wesley, and I'm still trying to have this smile on my face, but I know it's half-hearted. I know I'm trying to cheer him up, but he knows it's not going to be an easy moment. And the doctor looks at us and he says, unfortunately, he's got a staph infection. Wasn't the first time we dealt with that. With a staph infection, an antibiotic doesn't just make everything better. They also have to lance the area. And I know that sounds incredibly gruesome, but it's just a part of what it is. And so Wesley hears these words, and I can immediately see it wash over his face. And I know the color drained out of my face, and the doctor goes, from the best I can tell, there are about 11 spots I'm going to have to lance. In that moment, my prayer changed from God, take us anywhere but here, to God, please, just let it happen to me. Right? Like in that moment, if I could have done anything, I would have swapped places with Wesley so that he did not have to feel it, so he didn't have to go through it, so that the pain that was about to occur didn't happen to him, but happened to me. And so for the next 20 minutes, I had to hold him and pin him and tell him it was going to be okay as he walked through this incredibly painful moment. All while the only prayer I could utter is, God, please let it be me and not him. I'm I'm sure many of you have been in that same spot. Maybe not that particular spot, but we've all been in that spot before where it's somebody we love, somebody we care for, somebody we know that is going through something, and our deepest and our most earnest prayer is, God, please just let it happen to me. Please, let me swap with them. Let me substitute for their place. I think it's part of loving somebody. It's as we love somebody, as we truly love them, we would do anything we can to make sure they don't experience pain and heartache and heartbreak. But one of the lessons I learned in that moment, one of the lessons I didn't want to be true, one of the lessons we've all encountered is, as much as our prayer might be, God, please let me take their place, that just doesn't happen. It doesn't. Except for this one time. The last several weeks we've been walking our way through Holy Week. We've been experiencing it side by side with Jesus. We started with this huge celebration, this huge parade, all of the excitement that comes with that, of Jesus coming in and palm branches being waved and everybody loving Jesus and being excited. And we slowly watched the tension turn. We watched the crowd turn. Last week we celebrated Holy Communion as we gathered in our own small spaces. And it's a moment of great celebration because it's an offering that Jesus gives. Jesus pours out his body and his blood that we might have assurance, that we might have hope. But it's a double-edged sword. Because while we gain assurance and hope, the disciples in that room were also understanding that it came at a great cost. That it came at the cost of Jesus' very life. You see, as we move through Holy Week, we like the beginning of the week and we like the end of the week. Right? There is nothing we are more excited about than Easter, than resurrection. But as we get to the end of the week, that's normally something we like to gloss over. That's normally a portion of the week that we don't want to talk about and we don't want to look at. And it's mostly because it's gruesome and it's painful and it's hard. And my guess is it's hard not just because it's gruesome and it's painful, but it's hard because if we truly put ourselves in the place of the crowd, we have to answer for some things we don't want to. You see, the passage we heard out of Isaiah is certainly talking about Jesus, but verse 3 really sets it up. It says he was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity, one whom others hide their faces. He was despised and was held of no account. You see, Isaiah immediately sums up the mood of Thursday night and into Friday morning of Holy Week. The Jesus that's celebrated, the Jesus that's held on high, the Jesus that is shouted Messiah at is no longer there. And Isaiah's words ring true, right? The man who is despised and rejected, the man who people turn their face from. You see, not long after Jesus celebrated the Last Supper, he goes out to pray. And as he's praying, he says the very same prayer that I uttered in that room that day. It's the very same prayer I'm sure many of us have uttered before. He says, God, if it's your will, I understand. But if this cup can be taken from me, so be it. Right? God, if I have to do this, I get it. But if there's any other way, let's do that. How many times has that been our prayer? God, if there's any other way, let's do that. But as Jesus prays that prayer, Judas comes up, and we've already talked about Judas and the mistake he made, but Judas fulfills the rest of that promise to the chief priest, and he kissed Jesus on the cheek. And when he does it, it sets the whole thing in motion. The tension that had been building erupts. And the Gospels tell it a little bit differently, but in the end, Jesus is arrested and is taken. And all the way through Thursday night and into Friday morning, Jesus is bounced back and forth. He's taken before Pilate. He's taken before the chief priest. He's put in front of the people. He is rejected. He's ignored. He's flogged. He's tortured. The Jesus from the beginning of the week is very different from the Jesus that's described by Isaiah. The one who's beaten, the one who's rejected, the one who's scorned. And that's when we pick up in the Gospel of Mark. I want you to open it up to verse 15, and we're going to start to chapter 15 and start with verse 6 through 15. And as we read this, what I want you to do is I want you to follow along, but I want you to think of yourself as someone standing in the crowd that has gathered. You see, Pilate is going to be up on a balcony, and the people are going to be down in a square, and there's going to be a mass of them, and I want you to lose yourself in the crowd for just a moment. So starting in verse 6, it says, "Now at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to this custom. Then he answered them, 'Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?' For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again, 'Then what do you wish for me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews?' They shouted back, 'Crucify him.' And Pilate asked them, 'Why? What evil has he done?' But they shouted all the more, 'Crucify him.' So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them. And after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified." Passover is still going on, and as a part of that festival, every year somebody would be released. It was up to the will of the crowd. Now think about standing in the midst of that crowd for just a moment. Because Pilate looks at the crowd, and the crowd demands that somebody be released, that somebody be given back, right? And Pilate, who's thinking pretty clear-headed, knows, according to this passage, that Jesus has done nothing, right? He even asks them, "What has this man done?" He knows that it's the chief priest that has stirred up the crowd, and he even acknowledges that it's because of jealousy that they're doing it. The chief priests don't even have anything wrong that Jesus did. But it doesn't change anything at all. There's this prisoner named Barabbas who's in jail for murder. He's wrong. He's done it. His justice is to stay there. And yet the crowd gets stirred up into such a frenzy that they want Barabbas released instead of Jesus. They want a substitute. They want to swap. And you know, in life, 9 times out of 10, that never happens, right? I couldn't take the place of my son in that moment as he's getting hurt. You haven't been able to take the place of those loved ones as they face countless difficulties. It doesn't work. Yet in this instance, it did. There was a swap. There was a substitution. And let's be clear, it wasn't just about Barabbas for Jesus. It wasn't about letting a murderer go free so an innocent man would die. What it was a swap so that you and I, and the penalty for all of our mistakes and our sins, wouldn't have to face it. You see, as you stand in the crowd before Pilate, I want you to imagine not just yelling that Barabbas go free and an innocent man go forward, but I want you to see all of that sin and that mistake that you carry, that you commit, that you do, and I want you to project that onto the innocent person. Right? I want you to see that as being why Jesus makes his way towards the cross. Because in that moment when Jesus was swapped and was substituted, Jesus took that spot so that we didn't have to. That passage in Isaiah, it turns. It doesn't just say that he was rejected and despised, But in verse 4, it goes more to what he's done. It says, surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases, yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God. But he was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. And this line right here, upon him was the punishment that made us whole. You see, we really like Easter. And we like Easter because it's joy and it's celebration and it's excitement. We like it because it's new life and it's hope. We love it because it's resurrection. But you can't have Easter without first having death. You see, it's grisly and it's gruesome and it's cold, and it doesn't matter how you cut it. Death is going to be terrible. You see, up until that moment in that courtyard, up until that moment when the crowd shouted Barabbas, it was you and it was me and it was all of us that were on the hook. It was our sins that put us in that spot where Barabbas was. See, if you think about it, when it comes down to it, we have all been guilty of something. We've all committed sins. We've all messed up and made mistakes. In one moment, in a courtyard, Jesus substituted himself for us. Jesus did something that you and I that we can't do. And Jesus took our sin and our pain, and he took it to the cross. You see, we can't truly celebrate the joy of resurrection without understanding the depth of love that went into this moment. Because as you and I, as we've prayed that we could substitute ourselves for our loved ones, and we haven't ever been able to, Jesus did. And Jesus took all of it. He took our sin, he took our pain, he took our punishment, so that we might have new life. I want you to understand that, because as we draw closer to Easter, as we draw closer to that day of resurrection, you need to look at your life and to prepare space for that empty tomb, to prepare space for that resurrection. But that also means letting go of those things in your life that you hold on to and shouldn't. You see, Jesus took all of it from us. But my guess is that there are still things that each and every one of us that we hold on to, that we keep clutched tight. Things that draw us further and further away from God, but things that don't have to. As you reflect over this passage, as you continue thinking about it through the week, I encourage you to look at the depth of love that Jesus was willing to go to offer you hope. And to let that be enough. To let that be enough to let go of anything that's holding you back and anything that's holding you down. In just a couple of moments, we're going to sing a song, and it's one that I love, and it's one that I think is a great anthem for right now. And it's really simple. It's not a complicated song, but it's called Fear is a Liar. And it's a song that I think we need to hear, because you might tell me that there's not a whole lot in your life right now that's holding you back, that you've worked and that you've really tried to make a life worthy of the calling that God has placed in our life. But right now, maybe it's something even more simple than just an action or a pet sin. Maybe right now it's fear and it's anxiety. Maybe it's worry and it's panic. You see, whatever it is right now that is stopping you, let it go. Isaiah tells us he bore our punishment for us. Feel the depths of God's love in that moment, and let that be enough. Let us pray. God, this morning we come before you grateful. Grateful because of your love for each and every one of us. That you have called us by name. That you have forgiven us. That you offer us new life. And so this morning we step into that new life you've given us. Amen. This morning we might not be gathered in the same place. We might not be watching or participating in worship at the same time, but a huge part of worship is of us offering ourselves before God. We've offered up our songs, we've offered up our prayers, we've offered up ourselves, and so now is the time we would normally offer up our gifts and our offerings. It's not easy to do when you don't have a plate that's passed around, but there are still plenty of ways you can give. If you're looking to be able to give, you can go to our church website, stlukeskilgore.com, and click on the online giving tab and give that way. If you would like to mail your tithe or offering into the church, that works. Or if you want to drop it into the church drop slot in the office door, we'll take it that way as well. But now I still want to offer up a prayer over the offerings that we give. God, we not just offer ourselves up to you, but we offer our gifts and our tithes to you. We ask that you take them and you use them for the building of your kingdom. Amen. As we come to our last song, I mentioned that fear is a liar. I encourage you, if you don't know the words, to look them up. To join along and to let these words carry you through.
When he told you you're not good enough, when he told you you're not right, when he told you you're not strong enough to put up a good fight, when he told you you're not worthy, when he told you you're not loved, when he told you you're not beautiful, that you'll never be enough. Fear is a liar. He'll take your breath, stop you in your steps. Fear is a liar. He'll rob your rest, steal your happiness, cast your fear into the fire. Fear, he is a liar. When he told you you were trouble, you'd forever be alone. When he told you you should run, you'll never find a home. When he told you you were dirty, you should be ashamed. When he told you you could be the one that grace couldn't save. Fear is a liar. He will take your breath, stop you in your steps. Fear is a liar. He will rob your rest, steal your happiness, cast your fear into the fire. Fear, he is a liar. Let your fire fall and cast out all my fears. Let your fire fall and you lose all my fears. Let your fire fall and cast out all my fears. Let your fire fall and lose all I feel. Fear is a liar. He will take your breath and stop you in your steps. Fear is a liar. Steal your happiness.
that if you stay on our Facebook page, in just a couple of moments, Cody and Veronica are going to lead another set of some praise and worship songs. I encourage you just to listen in, to follow along, to use that as a time of song and prayer this morning as you just participate again in being a part of God's family. But now I offer up this benediction. In a time that's uncertain, in a time where we're never sure what might happen, we know that God is bigger than all of it. That God has called us. That God loves us. And that God is providing for us. Amen.